Hey, some of you know I'm a kind of deep bike nerd, and certainly as I've gotten older, I've fallen in love with mountain biking all over again. It's like fat skis, right? It's just so fun. My family rides, my friend ride. So one of the things what we find ourselves is, every once in a while new bikes come into our lives. So we happen to be at the world headquarters in Morgan Hill that specialize in Retül. And Retül is the body geometry, body fit, bike fit wing of Specialized. So we have all this incredible technology and it's mind-blowing, but we're also what the genius is. This is Aaron Post, who help make the rider fit the bike, and more importantly, the bike also fit the rider, that conversation, so that we get out of, we don't end up with some silly overuse injuries, problems. We just see that it's easy to do a lot of work in bad positions quickly. And then secondarily, it's even less about that. It's about wattage and power, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about, getting the most out of the bike. So the setup right now is that this is my new bike. A couple years ago, I came in, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I can't remember now, and you guys set me up on my stump jumper. Took me through the entire fit process. And what I thought was, well, obviously, I'm really good at my job. Let me just set up my own bike. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing today is making the case for seeing a bike fitter, or at least knowing a little bit more about some of your bike measurements and your body geometry. So if you end up with a new bike, you're not just cribbing this together, because my other bike fits me great and it's so comfortable. And then I have sort of been struggling and tinkering. And so what we have today is a conversation about how closely I got it based on feel alone. And it turns out maybe it wasn't very great.
No, you're right on. You're just like so many other riders out there that get their new bike and they want it to match exactly like their old bike. They forget that their fitter emailed them a fit document that has all the measurements. They're not exactly sure where they saved that piece of paper or what email that went to. So you just hop on the bike and you start riding. You're like, well, maybe this feels, this is really close, but the saddle needs to move. And you just keep tinkering around. It ends up taking you like a few rides.
I'm 10 rides in.
You're 10 rides in and you're still like, maybe it's not exactly right. So Retül digitizes the entire fit process. We take body measurements dynamically when you were on the bike originally. We know down to the millimeter, down to the degree, how your body was moving. And then at the end of that fit, we use that same digital equipment to document where the bike was. So I've pulled up your report. I'm taking a look at a side-by-side comparison of where your bike was when we did it a year ago versus where you've gotten your Epic today.
So slightly different bikes, a little bit more aggressive. How much does that matter? Does that matter a lot? Or is it really the seat height to the bottom of the pedal is pretty, my femur doesn't change?
If your goal is to make the bike feel the same between different experiences, then it doesn't really matter what's right here. I'll fit you to a refrigerator box if it's got a seat and handlebars, right? I care about where these points are in space relative to where you're pedaling. So if you think about bike fit, it's like a triangle. Here's your 0, 0 point on that graph. We need to triangulate where the saddle is in relationship to that bottom bracket. Then you need to triangulate where the handlebars are relative to the saddle. So if you're riding all Specialized bikes, but you got a stump jumper and an Epic, and you want to make them feel the same, we can absolutely do that. You got other bikes that aren't Specialized, we want to make it feel as good as you did on that Specialized, we could even do that too.
The question is, should I be trying, because this is all about feel for me, right? And I'm not a bike fit expert. I'm pretty good at making the body conform to whatever it needs to do. Mm-hmm. But should I be making my bikes try to feel the same? Because clearly I spent a ton of time on that stump jumper. The question now is, should this setup feel the same? Should the cockpit be oriented the same? Mm-hmm. Or should I accept that it's a different bike and these are my slalom skis, these are my giant slalom skis, right?
Right. One of the first questions I asked you when we were walking in was where do you ride? How do you ride the bike? So if you're riding your stump jumper and your Epic the same way on the same trails, then it makes sense to have their fits be almost identical. If you're riding the bikes in very different terrain, if this was a straight up race bike, I'm gonna go out and do a 3-hour cross-country race versus my stump jumper that all I care about is having fun on the downhills, then maybe those two setups would be tuned differently to those experiences. But you're telling me, I want both of these bikes to ride the same. I just want to have a little bit more travel on one, and I want to have maybe a little bit more efficient
I want to
climbing
keep it with
machine
my
on the
wife
other.
and my wife's friends. That's why I'm in the Epic, right? Okay. So you've got some basic measurements. How, like, seat height, and we're talking about seat height. You're looking at the height of the seat to the bottom bracket to the pedal.
The way that Retül documents our fit measurements is all around the center of the bottom bracket. That's your 0, point on your fit graph. So when we digitize those measurements, what it's literally doing, it's taking a tape measure from the center of the bottom bracket and going to the top center of the saddle, and that's the measurement that we care about.
Is there a lot of variation? I'm still with a SRAM pedal, I think, or maybe my other pedals are descendant, I can't remember, but is there going to be a lot of difference in crank arm, or is it really that relationship is the one that matters the most?
This can change. There's not a ton of variability, though, in mountain bike cranks on
What,
size.
I'm not that special? What are you talking about?
You're super special, but it's easier for us just to use the same length crank arms on a lot of stuff. 170 to 175 on bikes that are like size medium on up. Sometimes on smaller bikes, you might see some shorter crank arms, some 165s. But even then, you're talking 165 at the bottom end, 175 at the high end, and you can always just add that math in to set your saddle height.
So we've got our center point. How off? No, tell me, how much did I nail it? How much was the difference? Because, it feels like I'm generating a ton of good power on this position. Like, I feel like I'm slaying my friends right now.
Great. Glad you're doing really well. But if our goal was to be exactly where you were off of your initial fit, you're off by about 1.5 centimeters on your saddle height.
That's just 1.5 centimeters. So that's only just by that subjective feel. So maybe that subjective feel isn't necessarily the best. How would I be compensating? Is it that I'm making the seat lower so that I don't have to stretch as far? Like, what's going on? Why would I do that? Or I just am like, I didn't know.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the other things that you had mentioned was feeling like maybe my reach to the handlebars wasn't where it wanted to be. So this is a great point about how the setup up here affects how you feel here. So it's not just your saddle height that's affecting how you're feeling at the saddle, it's also your reach to your bars. And we see that your reach to your bars is a little bit longer.
Like maybe almost 2 centimeters?
Yep. So with that extra length there, when you bring your saddle down, because it's on an angle here, that's also effectively bringing you a little bit closer. So you may have been trying to solve for one by moving over here.
Meanwhile, I'm just riding like a little clown in a tiny car now and maybe not expressing my full power.
You're talking about power, and one of the things that can happen is sometimes, depending on the rider, you get a little bit lower saddle height. That's kind of like being a little bit deeper in that squat. And sometimes that makes you feel like you're more in your mid-range and you're really expressing a lot more of that power from your glutes and your quads. Might feel like you're pushing more power into the pedals. But there's a trade-off. If you start going lower and lower, you're starting to put more load on the backside of the patella, so then there's a higher potential for knee issues.
And potentially lost power. Because ultimately, the thing I'm interested in is how fast can I make the climb? Like, that is my jam. Like, we love to climb in our, that's what we love to do. We love to just go out and suffer straight up hills, right? Downhills, we have fun, but it's not the reason we ride. We like to go long distances. So, okay, with that in mind, knowing that reference, where do we begin to do that? Do we start to should I go back up to that seat height and see how that feels? What's the next step of this? Because, the bottom line is I'm trying to make the case that, it's feel is not good enough. And clearly the goal here was to say, how close did I nail it? Based on, and I'm pretty aware of my own body and positions, and obviously I didn't nail it. I mean, I feel like 1.5 centimeters is a lot.
It is. It's pretty significant. That could be a few degrees of flexion at the knee at the bottom of your pedal stroke if we had you on and remeasured your body movement. The way that I like to set up the bike is there's a specific order of operations. From bottom bracket to saddle first, we call that setting the engine. You want to make sure that your wattage cottage, where you're generating all of that power, is ideally set. It's like getting your engine in the most efficient and safest place first, and then you follow it up with the handlebar position.
Would that end up being pretty stable across platforms? Like knowing that and having that number means I could go rent a bike real quick and be like, here's my number.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for sure, it's like one of those things every rider, if they had a little tattoo of their saddle height right
Oh,
here,
man, that's so good.
That would be real easy to make sure that test rides, borrowed bikes, exercise equipment at the gym, you can get close so that you know that you're maximizing your workout and your potential, but also minimizing your chance for injury.
Love it. Okay, so what I love, and we'll talk about, we're going to set up a spin bike too, but one of the things that I appreciate is that I'm a multi-sport athlete. I'm not a cyclist. I paddle, I ride, we train, we do, I whitewater kayak. We do a lot of different sports, and cycling isn't just my own sport. In fact, I spend a lot of time using cycling to boost aspects of my fitness and training. So knowing this relationship is a good piece.
Yeah.
Because that means I can jump on equipment and quickly sort of dial in or know what equipment I'm on. Okay, so maybe we can talk through about how to set that up next.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
absolutely.
Great. Hang tough.